I knew my new neighborhood was strict, but I didn't realize I had moved into a place where a flower could apparently commit a crime. The letter was sitting on my front step when I got home from work, tucked under the edge of the welcome mat like somebody was afraid to touch it too long. Thick ivory paper, my name printed in this stiff little font, the kind of font that says, "We have rules, and we enjoy using them." At first, I thought it was a bill. Then I opened it. Violation notice. Unauthorized exterior color disturbance. Fine amount, $200. I read it twice, then a third time, because my brain refused to accept that I had just been fined $200 for planting orange and blue flowers. Not weeds. Not a broken-down car. Not a goat tied to the mailbox. Flowers. I stood there in my work shoes, holding that letter in one hand, looking at the tiny flower bed I had spent my entire Saturday planting. A few bright orange zinnias, some blue salvia, and a border of silver dusty miller. Because the lady at the nursery told me it would soften the edges. I didn't even know flowers could have edges, but I trusted her. And honestly, that little garden had made me happy. It was the first thing I had done to the house that felt like mine. My name is Ethan Brooks. I'm 36, I work as a copywriter, and up until that moment, the most rebellious thing I had ever done was put oat milk and coffee at a steakhouse in Texas. I had bought the house 3 months earlier in a subdivision called Willow Creek Reserve, which sounds peaceful, right? It sounds like a place with ducks, porch swings, maybe a retired couple named Jim and Linda who wave at you while watering hydrangeas. What it actually was a museum of beige. Beige houses, beige stone mailboxes, beige shutters, beige SUVs parked in beige driveways. Even the people looked like they had been selected from a catalog called Tasteful Neutral Living. Still, I wanted to fit in. I really did. I mowed my lawn. I rolled my trash bins back before sundown. I changed my porch light to the approved warm white bulb after getting a friendly reminder that my previous bulb was slightly cool in tone. So when I planted that small flower bed, I didn't think I was starting a war. I thought I was making my house look less like a dental office. At the bottom of the letter was a name I already recognized from the neighborhood newsletter, Patricia Whitcomb, chairwoman, Willow Creek Reserve Homeowners Association. Patricia had a reputation. I had never officially met her, but I had seen her. Everyone had. She walked the neighborhood every morning at 7:15 sharp, wearing pressed khakis, white sneakers, and a visor, carrying a clipboard like she was inspecting a prison yard. I called the number on the letter. She answered on the second ring. Willow Creek HOA, this is Patricia. I said, "Hi, Patricia, this is Ethan Brooks on Hawthorne Court. I just got a violation notice about my flower bed." There was a tiny pause, then paper shuffling. "Oh yes," she said. The bright display. The way she said bright made it sound contagious. I tried to laugh. Right. I just wanted to clarify. Are orange and blue flowers actually against the rules? They are inconsistent with the neighborhood's visual character. That's not really what I asked. The bylaws require all visible landscaping to support a calm, cohesive curb presence. I looked out at my flowers, glowing in the late afternoon sun like they had no idea they were criminals. I said, "They're zinnias, Patricia. They don't have a political agenda." She didn't laugh. "Mr. Brooks, we've received complaints." "From who?" "Anonymous residents." "About flowers?" "About visual disruption." I closed my eyes. "So what am I supposed to do?" "You'll need to remove or replace the non-conforming plants within 10 days. We recommend white begonias, pale lavender, or ornamental grasses in approved muted tones." There it was. Approved muted tones. Something about that phrase did it. It hit a nerve I didn't know I had. Because I had spent most of my life being the guy who didn't make trouble. The guy who swallowed the comment, stepped aside, apologized first, smiled through disrespect because it was easier than making a scene. At work, with clients. In my marriage before it ended. Even in my own family. And now here was this woman, telling me the first happy thing I had added to my own home was too loud. I said, "So just to be clear, if I plant something dull enough, I'm acceptable?" She sighed. "Mr. Brooks, this is not personal." That was the funny thing people always said right before making something personal. I paid the fine because I didn't know what else to do. Then I sat at my kitchen table that night with a beer, the HOA handbook, and the kind of anger that doesn't explode right away. It just sits in your chest, hot and quiet. The handbook was 240 pages. I read all of it. I learned that fences could not exceed 6 feet unless bordering a utility easement. I learned wind chimes had to be pleasant in tone and limited in duration, which felt like a sentence written by someone who had once lost a fight with a bell. I learned artificial pumpkins were allowed in October, but whimsical scarecrows required approval. And then, around midnight, I found the landscaping section. There was a list of approved plants. Long list. Roses, boxwoods, irises, ornamental kale, pansies, heuchera, sedum, coneflowers, Japanese maples, fountain grass. There were rules about height, rules about mulch, rules about edging, but not one line about flower color. Not one. The fine had been based on visual character, which, legally speaking, was just a fancy way of saying Patricia didn't like my taste. I leaned back in my chair and smiled for the first time all day. If she wanted calm and cohesive, I was going to give her calm and cohesive. I was going to give her the calmest, most cohesive nightmare Willow Creek had ever seen. The next morning, I drove to a little nursery outside town called Fox Hollow Plants. Not one of those polished garden centers with scented candles and decorative birdhouses. This place had gravel paths, crooked greenhouses, and a man at the register who looked like he had argued with every plant personally. His name was Hank. He said, "You looking for anything special?" I said, "I need a garden that follows HOA rules but makes one specific person regret learning to read." He stared at me for a second, then slowly smiled. "Now that," he said, "is a customer service request." I showed him the approved plant list. I told him the story. By the time I got to approved muted tones, Hank was laughing so hard, he had to lean on a bag of potting soil. He walked me through the greenhouses like we were planning a jewel heist. Black pearl peppers, deep purple heuchera, near black pansies, burgundy fountain grass, dark leaf dahlias, chocolate cosmos, smoky sedum, a dwarf Japanese maple with leaves so red they looked almost black in shade. "Technically," Hank said, tapping the list, "every one of these is approved." "Technically is my favorite kind of correct," I said. We made a plan. Not a messy garden. Not ugly. That would have been too easy. This thing had to be perfect. Trimmed. Symmetrical. Tasteful. Every edge clean enough to make a surveyor weep. A garden so dark, so dramatic, so completely legal, Patricia would have to stand there and swallow every word of her own rulebook. I removed the orange and blue flowers on a Saturday morning. I actually felt bad doing it. They hadn't asked to be part of this. They were innocent casualties in a very dumb war. Then Hank pulled up in an old pickup with soil, mulch, plants, and a black metal garden arch I definitely had not ordered. I said, "What's that?" He said, "Atmosphere." By noon, half the neighborhood had noticed. A man across the street slowed his jog to a walk. A woman pushing a stroller stopped long enough to whisper into her phone. 2 teenagers on bikes rolled by, and one said, "Yo, that house is turning into a vampire restaurant." I gave him a thumbs up. By 3 o'clock, the garden had shape. Dark foliage in the back, black pansies along the border, burgundy grasses bending in the breeze, a charcoal-colored birdbath in the center, and that Japanese maple standing like a little storm cloud near the walkway. Hank spread black mulch so rich and dark it looked like fresh coffee grounds. It was beautiful, not cheerful, not soft, but beautiful in a way I hadn't expected. It looked intentional, confident, like the house had finally developed a spine. Patricia arrived at 4:10. I saw her coming from 3 houses down, walking fast, clipboard pressed to her chest, mouth tight enough to crack walnuts. She stopped at the edge of my lawn. "Mr. Brooks," she said. "Patricia," I said, wiping dirt from my hands. "Great timing. We're just finishing the replacement landscaping." She looked at the garden, then at me, then at Hank, then back at the garden. "What is this?" I smiled. "Compliance." Her eyes narrowed. "This is not in keeping with the spirit of the neighborhood." I reached into my back pocket, pulled out the plant list, and unfolded it. Every plant is approved. Mulch is allowed. Edging is compliant. Height is under regulation. The birdbath is under 30 inches. The arch is decorative, non-structural, and placed behind the setback line. Hank leaned on his shovel and said, "Man did his homework." Patricia's nostrils flared. "This feels intentionally antagonistic." I nodded. Feelings can be tricky. For a second, nobody moved. Then she said quietly, "This isn't over." And she walked away. Now, I'll be honest, I thought that was the climax. I thought she would write another letter, maybe threaten a hearing, maybe glare at my yard until the plants got uncomfortable. I did not expect police lights. But 2 days later, there they were, flashing red and blue against my garage door while I was eating leftover pizza over the sink. I stepped outside and found 2 officers standing on the sidewalk with the expressions of men who already regretted getting out of the car. Behind them stood Patricia, arms crossed, looking like she had personally summoned justice. The older officer said, "Are you Mr. Brooks?" "Yes, sir. We got a call about a potentially disturbing display." I looked at my garden. "The plants." He rubbed his forehead. "That appears to be the complaint." Patricia jumped in. "It's menacing. It is clearly meant to intimidate the community." I said, "Patricia, it's ornamental kale and pansies." The younger officer made the mistake of looking at the bird bath, then at the little black garden gnome Hank had secretly added near the maple. The gnome was holding a tiny shovel and staring into the street like he had seen war. The officer coughed, badly hiding a laugh. The older officer walked closer, studied the flower bed, then turned to Patricia. "Ma'am, is there something illegal here? It violates community standards. Is that a law?" "It's an HOA matter." "Then it sounds like an HOA matter." She stiffened. "Officer, this display is hostile." The officer looked back at me. "Mr. Brooks, are you threatening anyone with these plants?" I said, "Not unless they're allergic to drama." The younger officer lost it for half a second and turned away. The older officer sighed, and that sigh had years in it. "Ma'am," he said, "please don't call emergency services over landscaping again." Patricia's face went red. The cruisers left. Curtains all along the street twitched. Somewhere, I swear, somebody clapped once. That should have been the end. But people love a ridiculous story, and Willow Creek had been bored for years. By morning, photos of my garden were on the neighborhood Facebook group. Somebody posted, "HOA fined him for bright flowers, so he planted the Addams family estate." Another person wrote, "Honestly, this is the best the neighborhood has ever looked." Then came the local news blog. Then a reporter. Then a headline, "Man's dark garden becomes bright spot in HOA fight." Patricia must have hated that. The board called an emergency meeting the following week. I walked into the community clubhouse with a laptop, a folder, and a level of calm I had not felt in years. Patricia sat at the center table with 3 other board members. She didn't say hello. She said, "Mr. Brooks, your behavior has brought embarrassment to this community." I sat down. I'd argue the fine did that. Her jaw tightened. One board member, a soft-spoken guy named Marvin, said, "We just want to resolve this." So I opened my laptop. I prepared a short presentation. Patricia blinked. "That won't be necessary." "I think it will." The first slide was a photo of my original flowers. Bright, simple, harmless. The second was the violation notice. The third was the approved plant list, with every plant in my current garden highlighted. The fourth was a photo of the police car outside my house. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I just told the truth in the plainest way possible. I said, "I bought a house here because I wanted a quiet place to rebuild my life. I followed the rules. When I was fined for a rule that doesn't exist, I followed the written rules even harder. And now I'm being treated like a problem because I didn't disappear quietly." Nobody spoke, so I kept going. This was never about flowers. It was about control. It was about deciding whose taste counts and whose doesn't. And maybe that seems small, but small humiliations add up. They teach people to shrink. I'm done shrinking. Patricia looked away first. 2 days later, I got an envelope. Inside was a refund check for $200 and a notice that Willow Creek Reserve would be reviewing vague enforcement language to ensure fairness and consistency. Patricia resigned as chairwoman by the end of the month. No apology. Of course not. People like that rarely apologize. They just rename defeat as a transition. But the neighborhood changed. People waved more. Someone planted red geraniums. Someone else painted their front door navy blue and dared the universe to object. Even Marvin from the board stopped by one evening and said, "For what it's worth, I always liked the blue flowers. I still have the dark garden." It started as revenge, I guess. Or pride. Or exhaustion. Maybe all 3. But now, when I sit on the porch at night and see the black pansies moving in the breeze, I don't see anger anymore. I see proof. Proof that sometimes the people who call you difficult are just upset you finally read the rules for yourself. And last week, something funny happened. Right in the middle of all that dark mulch, where nothing bright was supposed to be, a single yellow wildflower popped up. Tiny thing. Totally uninvited. Completely against the theme. I thought about pulling it. Then I thought about Patricia. And I left it there. So now I want to ask you, was I petty or was I right? When rules are used to bully people, is malicious compliance fair game? And have you ever seen someone in power get exposed by their own ridiculous standards? Drop your story in the comments, because I promise you, somewhere out there, another Patricia is holding a clipboard, just waiting to be humbled.